Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn research seminar on findings and recommendations from the Targeted Earlier Intervention Program Evaluation. My name is Jessica Stewart. I'm the Executive Director of Family and Community Services, Insights Analysis and Research, also known as FACSIA in the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice. Now, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that wherever we are joining today's webinar from across New South Wales and beyond, we are living and working on Aboriginal land that was never ceded. I'd like to personally acknowledge the Bidjigal people, who are the owners and First Nations people of the area where I have the privilege of joining from today. And I would like to pay my respects to all First Nations elders, past and present, and extend that to Aboriginal colleagues who may be joining us today. So I'd also like to warmly welcome all of our participants for this webinar. We have had over 1,100 people register, which is really fantastic. We have a whole range of people dialing in from frontline staff in NGOs and Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, DCJ staff and other government agencies, academics, policymakers, peak organisations. It's really fantastic, and it just shows the interest in evaluation findings and interest in how we can best provide support services to families and reduce the need for child protection and out-of-home care. So today's webinar, we'll be hearing about the evaluation of the Targeted Early Intervention Program. This is one of DCJ's key initiatives to strengthen families and communities across New South Wales. It prioritises young people and families who are experiencing or who are at risk of vulnerabilities such as child abuse and neglect, and ensures these issues are addressed early and protective factors are reinforced. So we will be hearing from representatives from the evaluation team who will outline the findings of the evaluation. We will also have Anthony Shannon, Director of Early Intervention and Inclusion in DCJ, who will discuss what these findings mean for program policy and practice. After the presentation, I'll lead a Q&A session, but please put your questions and comments at any time into the chat, and our presenters may answer those as we go, or I can come to those during the Q&A session. I also just wanted to let you all know the session will be recorded and posted on our FACSIA webpage, and if you have registered for the webinar, you'll receive the link to the recording within about a week. So I'd now like to introduce our presenters for today. Anthony Shannon is our Director of Early Intervention and Inclusion with DCJ. He's currently leading statewide child protection, early intervention policy and programs, including targeted early intervention and the Family Connect and Support program. Anthony has also led the targeted early intervention reform since 2016. Ken Zulamovsky, also known as Kira Dan, is of Kubi Kubi First Nations and Macedonian Australian heritage. Ken is the founder of the private consultancy Gamarada Universal Indigenous Resources, and a story that traces back to the personal journey of Kira Dan, who transformed his life from a vulnerable youth to a community organiser. At age 16, Ken overcame juvenile crime convictions and single parent welfare dependence and embarked on a 10-year career in the Australian Army Reserve, serving as an artillery crew commander and defence career advisor. This period shaped his leadership and resilience and fuelled his commitment to supporting vulnerable communities. Welcome, Kira Dunn. Lou Campbell is a director with Social Ventures Australia Consulting and heads up its New South Wales and ACT team. With a background in economics, Lou worked across the public, commercial and non-profit sectors in Australia, the UK and Africa for 20 years prior to joining SVA in 2017. Lou now works with leadership teams and boards across the social sector to determine their strategic path and understand their impact. Lou has particular focus on financial wellbeing and work with First Nations communities. Welcome, Lou. And Hugh Miller is a principal at Taylor Fry, a statistician and actuary by training, has spent most of the past decade analysing large government data sets across areas such as family services, disability, housing, health and welfare. Welcome to you, Hugh. And thank you all again so much for joining us. And please go ahead, Anthony.
Thanks, Jess. Let me start by giving you some background on the Targeted Early Intervention Program and some context for the program evaluation. The Targeted Early Intervention Program is New South Wales Communities and Justice Key Child Protection Early Intervention Program. The program offers voluntary and flexible support to children, young people, families and communities where the evidence suggests it will have the most impact, early in life and early in need. The program recognises that the needs of families and communities are not static, and that people move in and out of hardship and disadvantage and will need different levels and types of support over time. TEI services promote family and community wellbeing, build protective factors and work to reduce vulnerability and risk factors, particularly those that may lead to child abuse, neglect and family violence. The program helps to foster and grow personal, family and community level strengths and capacity. The target population for the TEI program is children, young people, families and communities in need, with a focus on a number of key cohorts: 0 to 5-year-olds, children and young people at risk of disengagement from school, family and community, young parents with known vulnerabilities or hardships, and Aboriginal children, young people, families and communities. TEI is delivered across 2 program streams: the Community Strengthening Stream, which focuses on community wellbeing and inclusion and empowering Aboriginal communities, and the Wellbeing and Safety Stream, which aims to support children, young people and families with targeted and intensive support, including helping parents and caregivers provide children and young people with a safe and nurturing home. The program commenced in 2020 following an extensive collaborative redesign process with the sector and peak organisations. And here is a snapshot of TEI service delivery and reach in 2023 to 24. So last year, there was 468 service providers delivering just over 500,000 sessions across 1,470 outlets in New South Wales. The program supported 176,888 individual clients, of which 15 identified as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and just over 1,100,000 unidentified group clients also received support. Service providers in the program typically include neighbourhood and community centres, Aboriginal community controlled organisations, family support services, multicultural organisations, parenting programs, supported playgroups and youth services, just to name a few. The TEI service system is diverse, ranging from large non-government organisations through to small community-based providers, with providers typically locally based with strong connections to local communities. Investment in TEI in 2024-25 is $192 million, with 10.3% of that investment with Aboriginal and community-controlled organisations. In December 2022, DCJ commissioned Taylor Fry, working in partnership with Social Ventures Australia and Gamarada Universal Indigenous Resources, to undertake a process, outcome and economic evaluation of the TEI program. The purpose of the evaluation was to assess the overall impact of TEI and build the evidence base to inform the evolution of the program. The evaluation also aimed to examine evidence of the efficiency of programs under each program stream to support investment and service delivery alignment, as well as identify areas and strategies for program improvement. The Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council provided ethics oversight for the evaluation, and the evaluators worked closely with an external Aboriginal reference research group, independent of DCJ, consisting of 9 Aboriginal community-controlled organisations and ABSEC, the state peak. The interim evaluation report was delivered in May 2024 and the final report in November 2024. Both reports are published on the New South Wales Communities and Justice website. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the TEI sector for all the work they have done in making this evaluation possible. And now I'll hand you over to Ken. Thanks.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks to Jessica for that wonderful acknowledgement of the country. Nagara Gamarada, Kiradan. Most of my presentation today will be focused around governance, a little bit about Aboriginal engagement and some of the findings. I'm going to set myself a timer now so I don't run over time. I've got a lot to get through, so forgive me if we go a little bit quickly. So I want to share with you some of the critical, what I think are critical success components of this evaluation and how it's a standout evaluation in the evolution of Aboriginal-led governance and Aboriginal the integrity of Aboriginal governance in the space of research evaluation. So from the outset, Aboriginal research formed a major component of this evaluation, but while questions relating to Aboriginal providers and clients had always featured as a core element of the evaluation, Gamarada was enabled to take the initiative and lead further advocacy with DCJ to increase the scope of Aboriginal research component within the evaluation. This broadened scope encompassed the following points: incorporating Gamarada Universal Indigenous resources as part of the evaluation team responsible for Aboriginal governance and the AHMRC ethics application. Committing to achieving the highest standard of ethical research, having the evaluation plan reviewed and approved by Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council. Tasking Gamarada to establish independent Aboriginal-led governance consisting of the independent Aboriginal reference group, mentioned by Anthony, with specific terms of reference and statement of duty, with ABSEC, our peak body, peak representative, along with those 9 members. And they provided input into the evaluation process and interpretation of the findings. The broadened scope of the evaluation also encompassed the co-design of the research tools and undertaking dedicated analysis of provider survey responses submitted by providers identifying as Aboriginal controlled, as well as committing to 2 case studies, site visits with ACO providers and clients. The results of the Aboriginal component have played a key role in understanding and interpreting both the qualitative and the quantitative findings. These findings are set out in sections 8 of the report and make for a very good read if you want to have a look. So more on the evaluation governance. The evaluation has been endorsed by a number of governance bodies as follows. This is important to note because our community control sectors, our communities, our peaks, they have the spotlight on us when we're conducting Aboriginal research, and we have a duty to perform to the highest standard. The DCJ internal working group was part of that. Internal working group comprised of DCJ staff from TEI, Family Community Service Insights, Analysis and Research, District Commissioning and Planning, and Transforming Aboriginal Outcomes. The internal working group with DCJ met with the evaluation team once a month to discuss governance topics such as key findings, approach to methodologies, and research timeline. The DCJ internal Aboriginal Advisory Group comprised of Aboriginal DCJ staff who provided expert guidance over the evaluation methodology and approach, with special consideration to cultural appropriateness and cultural safety. Our Aboriginal reference group, consisting of the 9 ACO representatives, the HSDS Governance Advisory Committee, the cross-agency group that monitors to ensure appropriate use of the results and the results are correctly interpreted, and some others, including the Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council, as we mentioned, another peak organisation that ensures a cultural sensitivity for all aspects of research that involve Aboriginal people. The evaluation code, the evaluation governance and co-design of the research plan. So we go over to slide, we move across to where we got. So some background we've already, you might be familiar with. Obviously, as Anthony said, TI program with Aboriginal children and families, it's a priority. There's some grim statistics that you would be familiar with already, and the historical service usage among clients is high due to the systemic disadvantage and intergenerational trauma. TI aims to reduce the numbers by providing culturally appropriate early intervention services, of course. So service delivery for Aboriginal children and families. So the TEO services include Aboriginal community controlled organisations, ACOs, as well as the mainstream providers. But during our engagement on the ground with the services, many ACO providers emphasise the importance of cultural safety, trust building, and community-led approaches. You know this because it's pretty common knowledge, but I'm going to add I want to further validate the voice of the ACO sector. In 2.24 of the report, evidence around Aboriginal programming. It's recognised there are continuing challenges faced by Aboriginal people in a system that doesn't fully empower and resource us to design and implement our own initiatives. In the lead up to this evaluation, 2022-23, Gamarada undertook a review of evidence around Aboriginal-led early support programs. The focus was on Aboriginal-led initiatives beyond the DCG-funded programs. The review was conducted in the context of recent criticism of government's approach to the oversight and implementation of the Aboriginal outcome strategy in reducing the overrepresentation of Aboriginal children and young people in out-of-home care. We believe the findings of this review relevant to the report, and here Gamarada recommended community co-design, community-led, culturally safe, strength-based, culturally affirming, trauma-informed, healing-based, holistic, coordinated, and flexible early support programs for young children, youth and families and communities to maximise the outcomes. Gamarada also recommended sustained government funding to health literacy programs, preventative and restorative community-led programs, Aboriginal health and support workers, culturally safe spaces, and skill building programs, as well as service components such as transport, support programs and food in waiting rooms in order to strengthen gains in social and health indicators for vulnerable community members. The report also concluded that the evidence base for Aboriginal-led early support programs revealed the complexities of seeking standards of evidence for Aboriginal programs that do not operate in isolation of cultural context factors. Moreover, Gamarada's review suggested the conceptual framing of standards of evidence may also require deeper inquiry with Aboriginal communities to ascertain its meaning and application. So within the context of TEI, this means that the need for future research to fully understand the extent to which Western epistemology and statistical approaches are valid within Aboriginal communities. The funding for ACO's provided TEI services remains below the target, although I think Anthony mentioned that it's higher than the statistic I've got there. So I think there's been some improvements even since the report, the launch of the report only 3 months ago. Key TEI outcomes for Aboriginal children and families. So there are many outcomes that the report revealed. These are just a few of note. Safety outcomes. So Aboriginal children engaged in TEI programs saw improve in child protection outcomes, fewer interactions, but hard to say whether better or worse than in the overall improvements. Client satisfaction, the clients reported high levels of satisfaction, extremely high levels of satisfaction with the ACO-led services, particularly playgroups and cultural informed programs. And we observed that on the ground, face-to-face, when we visited and conducted the surveys with the two ACO sites, GNL on the Central Coast and Mullumbimby in Newcastle. Cultural outcomes, clients in interviews believe that TEI services provided an opportunity for their children to attain cultural connections, and we saw that again in our site visits, in our conversations with the clients. Sometimes we observe them in the midst of some of the activities at the sites. There was painting, there was weaving, there was art, there was dance, there was sharing of lore and culture through narratives, and there was kinship displayed, very strong kin. And I think I got like 1 minute left. So the next one, recommendations. So there are very many recommendations. These are a couple to note. Obviously, we strongly recommend increased funding and capacity of the ACOs to deliver the TEI services. We think they are the best place to deliver this type of early intervention, and that reflects strong qualitative feedback on the importance of culturally safe practices across providers. And in the report, you can read more about the topic of cultural safety and what that means for service providers. And the last recommendation, improve data collection to measure cultural outcomes. That requires more rigorous, as I mentioned before, sitting down with community and understanding Aboriginal perspectives on research to ensure that the tools that are used are culturally valid. And that's about it. I'm going to hand over now to Lou. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ken. We're really appreciative of the strong teamwork across the 2 years of this evaluation, working with you, Ken, and with Hugh's team at Taylor Fry. I'm joining you all from Gadigal land, part of the Eora Nation, and I'm going to share with you 3 aspects of the evaluation. First, I'll talk a little bit about the qualitative approaches or methods undertaken, share a little bit about what we learned overall about how TEI, and I'll use that acronym if that's okay with everyone, how TEI has been implemented, and also what we learned from the qualitative research about the factors influencing outcomes. And then Hugh will tell us more later about what the data tells us about outcomes being achieved. So just to share a little bit about the approach. As Anthony explained at the outset, TI is genuinely a broad and diverse program. So that breadth of providers, services and communities that form part of TI meant that we had to be really thoughtful in designing an approach that could both reflect that breadth, but also provide a tangible sense of what the services and the outcomes looked like on the ground for individuals. So we took a mixed methods approach, acknowledging, the strengths and limitations of sort of the range of data sources in order to try and develop that full picture. So on the left-hand side of the screen, these are the methods that we applied to try and answer the process evaluation questions that Anthony outlined at the beginning, really sort of how well was TEI implemented. So that started off with interviews with peak bodies that represent orgs delivering TI services and also program delivery staff within the department, really to understand how TI had been delivered to date, its successes, perhaps opportunities to improve, and really grateful to everybody who we interviewed for some pretty open and honest insights shared. Those conversations then helped us to develop questions that we would take to the broader sector, the TEI sector, through an in-depth survey. So it was issued to all TEI providers and the response rate was pretty incredible. And that was in large part due to the work of people across the department working with providers to really emphasise how important it was that we did get feedback through that survey. Then we sort of looked to the right-hand side of the screen. These were the methods we really want to try to apply to those outcome evaluation questions. And the ones that we were particularly trying to think about was the factors that would contribute to outcomes being achieved. So yes, we could still use the provider survey. We're understanding perspectives about which outcomes providers were observing and why. And then we undertook a series of case studies that allowed us to go deeper to understand the types of changes that TEI could enable. So those case studies involved interviews with staff delivering the programs, site visits, as Ken mentioned, and also interviews with a sample of clients working with each of those service providers. So the methodology for those case studies had inputs from our advisory groups, particularly from the Independent Aboriginal Reference Group that Ken outlined. And given the breadth of TEI, we were really trying to get sort of a really nice representation across that breadth. So some of the characteristics that we really wanted to make sure we could include, one was around sufficient representation of Aboriginal control. So we had 2 ACOs that we were able to visit. We want to get a spread across metropolitan and regional areas, and also a bit of a mix of large and small providers. So we worked with the department to get a short list of providers, and obviously it required them to be available and willing to be able to participate, be able to host up to 10 clients of their clients on site for interviews, and obviously to make staff available for interviews. So we are really grateful to those 5 organisations and their clients for that generosity of time and sharing of perspectives. So yeah, we were able to speak with Mullumbimba, an ACCO in the Hunter region, Gujagang, an ACCO in the Central Coast region, Interreach, which is providing services out in the Murrumbidgee district and going as broad as Deniliquin and Corowa, Creating Links, which is a smaller provider in Bankstown and southwestern Sydney, with a large proportion of culturally and linguistically diverse clients, and then Uniting, a larger provider, but we were very much focused on some of their work in southwestern Sydney as a sort of mix of urban and rural LGAs. So I'll share with you towards the end of my section just a bit of an excerpt of what we heard during those visits. But perhaps let's sort of look at the bigger picture about what we found relating to the process evaluation questions. How well has TEI program been implemented? Look, it's probably sort of saying the well known to everybody, but the backdrop against which TEI was implemented had some pretty important implications for providers and community members. And commencing in mid-2020, the environment was complex, affected by significant external circumstances such as COVID lockdowns, natural disasters. I'm thinking about the major flooding in 2022 and increasing cost of living over the past 2 to 3 years. So what that meant for providers is that client numbers tended to be increasing, and also that those clients were invariably facing increasingly complex challenges and levels of risk. But in terms of those findings, at sort of the highest level, progress had been made against most of those reform aims, and that looked like sort of simplified reporting, reforming contract arrangements, bringing in sort of new monitoring and evaluation approaches and data collection, and also some of those local governance arrangements. And when we kind of refreshed this for the final report, there'd been some additional progress made around some of the need-based commissioning. I guess one piece to call out, as sort of Ken also mentioned, that some of those funding targets for delivery from ACCOs had not yet been achieved, but the department has renewed its commitment to that investment, and we are sort of, and that will be sort of a focus on some of that Aboriginal-led commissioning principles going forward. The other thing we heard strongly was that providers had pretty strong positive feedback about working within the TEI structures and the processes, which included having longer, more flexible contracts, some resources and evidence about local needs that they were being able to access, and then the relationships with some of the commissioning staff at a local level really enabled them to deliver the best possible services they could. Certainly one of those sort of perhaps more limiting aspects that some of them spoke about was some of the funding allocations, and I guess what is required in order to actually really secure positive outcomes for participants. And I guess that's sort of a final point I will make here. Just some feedback about sort of the role of TEI within the broader service system. And as we sort of saw, as many of the providers saw, increasingly complex client challenges, that really TEI wanted to remain focused on providing early support and not necessarily just at that kind of crisis stage. So as Anthony explained to us at the beginning, there's some pretty clear priority groups for TEI, and the evaluation found that the program's been effective in targeting and prioritising those clients with known risk factors and vulnerabilities. So around 4 in every 10 clients tended to be from one of those priority groups. And then when we looked at the more intensive services in the wellbeing and safety stream, over 50% of clients were in those priority groups. So we can see that the services are really reaching those vulnerable cohorts. The reach is also increasing. So TEI services continue to grow. So we could see there an uplift, and 16 and 23% respectively for group and individual clients from the 21-22 to 22-23. And it looked through the evaluation that the funding was quite well concentrated and focused where those areas of socioeconomic disadvantage could be seen, and that's drawing from some of the CEFA data. I guess the one point to make about sort of reach into the future, where we're going to see significant population growth across some of those districts: Western Sydney, Southwest Sydney, Illawarra, Shoalhaven. There's some of those kind of districts which are going to likely see increased demand for TEI support. So look, last thing I'll cover, and I'm very conscious that this is absolute whistle-stop tour through a really in-depth 2-year evaluation. But let me just share with you some of the themes that came out of the qualitative work. And these are trying to really sort of think through the factors that contribute to better or poorer outcomes. So from that, those interviews, the case studies, what we heard was that TEI tends to be influencing a pretty broad range of outcomes. So some of those relate to a sense of belonging in the community, participating in the community, individual sense of empowerment or self-determination, and in some instances, providers could also sort of see improved health outcomes. So another outcome seemed to be the effectiveness of referrals as well. So what we could also see is that there was increased referrals to key service areas, and housing was a great example of where TEI services were having really effective referrals. So in terms of the factors that seem to make the difference, providers believed that it's the flexible and adaptable nature of their services was critical to achieving outcomes. And so that's often based on having strong relationships and connections with clients and the communities in which they're working. There's obviously a sort of implication of that is a resource-intensive thing to achieve. So providers did emphasise that adequate funding was crucial for their ability to achieve outcomes with clients. And also sort of note that whatever's going on in that external environment, whether that be cost of living or other sort of external circumstances, has a pretty significant implication. So I'm just going to close. I just want to share two excerpts from the interviews with clients, just so that we can get a sense of what this program does actually mean to people who are sort of living with lived experience. I encourage people to go and have a look at these case studies in the final report. If you want to dig a little bit deeper, there's a really rich picture of what TEI services look like. So the first client I'm going to share worked with GNL. They said, "I really think I would have had to give the kids up. I just wouldn't be able to handle it by myself. They provide the community to help me raise the kids together." And then the second client excerpt I'd love to share was from a client saying, "Uniting. My life was in chaos. It meant a lot to me to receive Uniting support. To go from where we were, we hit rock bottom. I was suicidal. I couldn't say where I would be without them. I probably wouldn't have my kids. I would have had to give them up." So thank you very much for your time. I will now hand on to Hugh to tell us a little bit more about the outcomes evaluation.
Good day, everybody, and thanks to Jess, Anthony, Ken, and Lou. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to be part of the team to evaluate this. I'm going to talk today about quantitative results for the evaluation, focusing on outcomes and the economic results. So if you like numbers, this section is going to be the segment for you. And of course, if you really like numbers, there is the full report and lots of appendices with numbers that I can only really skim through today. So one notable feature of this research is that it did aim to provide strong evidence of impact using broader linked data. So that's sort of one feature, and happily we did get there. So I'll talk a little bit about our approach to testing outcomes quantitatively. So any quantitative analysis is always dependent on the data collected, and happily there was lots of faithfully collected information by providers across the past few years of TEI, so we're appreciative of that too. Our approach is multi-layered, reflecting the nature of this data, and you can see sort of what the data looks like in the figure, and we touched on that before, that we do for 2022-23 financial year, we do have a lot of group clients, so over 1 million people who we don't identify. Some of them might sort of represent more people presenting from multiple sessions. And in addition to that, we've got 160,000 individually recorded clients, so where we do sort of have some personal identifiers. For the broader sets, including group clients, we can look at aggregate outcome trends by region. So basically ask the question if there's evidence where regions where there's a large TI spend or a big change in TI spend, whether you see improved outcomes at that aggregate level, and that would constitute evidence of impact. So that analysis didn't produce very much, unfortunately. The aggregate testing was not super sensitive. For individual clients, we can be far more targeted and precise in how we test impact. So the key trick here is data linkage. So we can link clients to the human services dataset, which is a large New South Wales data asset covering a huge array of state services. Education, health, justice, child protection, housing, and more. And importantly, we can see people who interact with TI and those who don't.
The HSDS has very strong governance and privacy rules, so all the data is de-identified, reporting has to be aggregated up. So there are a lot of protections around this linked data because we do recognise it's very sensitive. You can also see the two blue boxes on the right for how we've used this data. First, we've tested outcome improvement for TI versus non-TI clients. And second, we're able to actually validate provider recorded outcomes, which are called scores in the underlying DEX system. And so that's sort of how we use that linked data. I've mentioned outcomes a couple of times. You might be wondering what types of things were we trying to measure? The program intent of TI is very broad. It actually seeks to improve outcomes across the whole human services outcomes framework, which is shown on the left there. 7 domains with a range of intended outcomes under each. For the purposes of evaluation, we have to operationalize this using what data we have, so the data that's collected as well as the administrative data that we can link to. This is always a slightly depressing process because the admin data tends to be a little bit more deficit-based, and inevitably there are things you want to measure that we can't see. But that's sort of the process there. And so the outcomes we tested are shown there on the right. We flagged a few outcomes as primary outcomes, as sort of discussed with stakeholders. These align with the safety domain and focus on avoiding later and future interactions with the child protection system. So you can see there that we're trying to see reduced numbers of concern reports, those risk of significant harm reports, ROSH, as well as out-of-home care episodes. So most of the numbers that will follow focus on these primary outcomes. In addition to that, we did actually test a huge range of secondary outcomes, 15 or so indicators listed there, but those were tested using a slightly simpler matching methodology. I'll touch on a little bit of that. The other thing I'll talk about before I launch into results is just a little note on how we try and measure outcomes. So here the example is the number of child protection reports as a proportion of the total number of people accessing TI over time. And hopefully this shows that sort of talking about decreases in child protection reports is a bit tricky because the numbers tend not to be stable. So what you see on the chart is that at time 0, that's the point at which people interact with TI services for the first time. And the y-axis is the proportion of the cohort. And here, again, these are the clients we can link to the administrative data that have a concern report each quarter. And you can see that that rate really ramps up before time 0, which means that people are actually engaging with TI at a point of heightened risk of vulnerability. So when we look at people with characteristics, so our question really is then, what would happen to people in the absence of TI? Because that gives us a way of measuring impact. And to do that, we actually have to look at people with similar characteristics from the non-TI cohort that we can do with the broader data, and basically look at what happens to them when they're at a similar point of heightened variability. So we tried to illustrate that on the dotted line there. So the dotted line is what we estimate from that broader data. That becomes our baseline. And then what we hope to see is that the actual line corresponding to TI participants sits below that, which means that there are fewer child protection reports than we'd otherwise expect. And the numbers on the next slide will sort of look at that box there, which is Q6, and ask the question, by Q6, do we see a decrease in those types of outcomes? And happily, the answer is for at least 3 out of 4 numbers shown here, the answer is yes, we do actually get improvement in outcomes, which is exciting. 2 of which are statistically significant, and we're happy to sort of squint and recognise that Roche decrease given the tight correlation between concern reports and Roche findings too. So at Q6, we actually see that concern reports are 6.6% lower than expected, based on that sort of baseline counterfactual. And of those starting in out-of-home care, we actually have a 4.8% lower rate of still being in out-of-home care at Q6. And so this entry into and out-of-home care goes the other way, so that's the red figure shown there. But the noise is pretty high and the number's not statistically significant. So overall, we regard these set of numbers as pretty good results. So solid, not life-changing in terms of massive effects, but they're positive and significant. We can also do a lot more sort of specific testing around these results. Generally, the absolute effect is higher for groups of more vulnerable people because the results apply to a higher base rate. So, for example, for people with a history of child protection, we actually see larger absolute decreases in the rates of these outcomes like concern reports. We did some testing around specific types of supports, recognising that TEI is actually quite a broad range of different services. These results tended to be a little bit less firm because we had to chop up the data, but they did seem to be larger for counselling and specialist support services. And we also saw some dosage effects, so larger decreases for those with more sessions. On secondary outcomes, we didn't find a huge amount. There were actually some increases for homelessness and mental health. Might be a little bit counterintuitive, but I think it's consistent with the qualitative findings and how providers operate, that often the role of TEI is to help people navigate to these services. And we also note that the high satisfaction scores that others have alluded to at the time, but we also had some quite good results around validating the provider collected scores. So these scores tended to correlate well with administrative outcomes. So if a provider recorded a person improving on their sort of outcomes that they measure, on average, those people would be less likely to interact with a service, be that child protection or domestic violence or homelessness, at a later point in time. We also looked at results for Aboriginal people. Ken's touched on this a little bit, and there's obviously more on the report. Overall, our conclusion was that TEI provides similar improvements in outcomes for Aboriginal people as our broader findings. And that comment I made before about larger absolute effects, because if you're at a position of higher vulnerability or risk, apply here too. So we know Aboriginal people do experience disadvantage, and we can see here that their rate of concern report is a fair bit higher than the rest of the population. And for that reason, they see a larger decrease. But sort of it's a similar size decrease in relative terms. We didn't find any bonus effects around sort of Aboriginal providers and ACCO specifically, but that's probably more due to sort of size and data issues. It's worth noting that the interview and survey results came through very strongly supporting these culturally appropriate services. And the last thing I wanted to touch on before I hand over again is about the economic evaluation portion of the analysis. So since we found tangible improvements in the outcomes, we can attach dollars to these and compare the program costs. So the short answer is we could find benefits of about 66 cents in the dollar when we can look at the outcomes for those individually linked client sessions. And so that's about $92 million of benefits compared to $139 million of spend. And so those benefits are recognising some of the value to the individual, so improved wellbeing and reduced trauma for those people, but primarily it's about saved government service costs in the future, and a lot of that is that sort of reduction in child protection activity, particularly diversion from out-of-home care, which is very expensive to government. So just a couple of comments on these results before I wind up. One is that these benefits are a little bit conservative because they just focus on the dollars tied to the outcomes that we sort of found and measured. So there are lots of other events and benefits that will likely provide benefits to participants that we haven't established or dollarized in this evaluation. Second, 66 cents on the dollar doesn't mean the program's not worth doing. The intent of these programs is obviously to help vulnerable and disadvantaged people. And so if it's doing that effectively, then there's a strong equity argument that lies behind some of these programs. And third, I guess it's probably, to my understanding, the first time this type of benefit has been attached. So I regard this as a useful step forward and probably something that can be improved in the future as well. So I'll pause there. Thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Anthony to finish up on recommendations.
Thanks, Hugh. So we consider this a landmark report providing independent, robust, high-quality evidence around the impact of TEI. It's highly promising and rich in potential. And as you mentioned, with concrete downstream improvements in outcomes often difficult to establish and to quantify for early intervention programs, the fact that safety benefits were able to be quantified in this evaluation is significant. The evaluation made a number of recommendations which we have committed to working on to improve the program. The first recommendation is to increase funding and capacity of ACOs to deliver TEI services and invest in building the capacity of new and emerging ACOs. The New South Wales Government and DCJ have committed to a target of investing 30% of early intervention program funds with ACOs. And as at December 2024, as I mentioned, TEI investment in the Aboriginal community controlled sector was at 10.3%, with further investment underway this year. Additionally, through the current TEI recommissioning process, we intend to at least double the investment in ACOs from what was 7.2% in August of 2023. We will also continue to support building the evidence base for Aboriginal-led service delivery following the release of the Aboriginal-led Early Support Program's evidence review that Ken mentioned earlier, and work with ACOs on the next steps. The second recommendation focuses on increasing TEI access in high population growth areas and remote locations. We recognise the significant levels of demand and gaps in the service system in some parts of New South Wales. With the program's historic resourcing constraints, this will be something we'll continue to need to manage. Through the recent TEI recommissioning, though, work has been done to better align service delivery to need. Improvements to service system analysis through the TEI program data and the evaluation will also assist in better targeting of service types in locations of demand and remote areas. Recommendation 3 focuses on greater opportunities for interim contract and funding reviews during a contract period and in response to changing circumstances. The TEI program offers flexibility for contract reviews during the contract period at a minimum annually, with the program logic annual reviews built into contracts. Service providers are also encouraged to engage with DCJ to amend or vary contracts during the contract period if needed, with the TEI streamlined contract amendment clause being widely supported across the sector. The fourth recommendation calls for increased flexibility in service provision and provider awareness. We'll continue to support flexibility in TEI service delivery to meet local needs and also be guided around evidence of what works. Through the program's updated program specifications, TEI has reinforced the practice principle and service system outcomes of flexible and responsive service delivery. This involves supporting diverse engagement methods to reach different client groups, recognising and responding to changes in communities, and providing different levels and types of support to people depending on their needs. Additionally, key TEI program requirements include ensuring free and accessible services with flexible timeframes. This requires services to be available at no cost to clients, with no eligibility criteria for access and with no specific time limit on the duration of service needed to achieve positive outcomes. We have also made significant progress together with the sector on meeting this recommendation through updating the program specifications in preparation for commencement of the updated Community and Family Support Program in 2026. These changes have included merging the targeted early intervention and family connected support programs into one program, streamlining program activities and service types, reducing duplication and simplifying program reporting. We have reiterated the program's early intervention objectives, increased the focus and integration of addressing family violence and its impacts, and strengthen the program's commitment to cultural safety for culturally, linguistic and diverse people and communities. These program amendments have also embedded more evidence into the program and introduced service system outcomes. Recommendation 5 calls for an increased focus on community engagement and partnership development in TEI. Together with neighbourhood and community centres and the local Community Services Association, we have increased the focus on community engagement in the updated program specifications. The Community Strengthening Program activity highlights the importance of strong community wellbeing in helping children, young people and families thrive, especially when they are in need. Using community development approaches, community strengthening aims to build social community connections and enhance cohesion by connecting members of a community in need with broader networks. Key strengths of neighbourhood and community centres, acknowledged in the program, are their ability to develop authentic partnership with community, provide a soft entry point to other supports and services, and deliver and sustain vital social infrastructure. And for young people in particular, the presence of community-level protective factors may be especially important for extending the reach of specialist services to support young people. The critical importance of community strengthening is further highlighted by the community strengthening evidence review undertaken with the sector and recent work underway with DCJ and the local Community Services Association to agree a shared commitment to collaboration for neighbourhood and community centres in New South Wales. We know that children, young people and families are better supported in the local service system when there is strong collaboration between services, and the evaluation highlights the role TEI plays in the wider service system. One of the key program requirements of the program is added emphasis on referral pathways and sector collaboration, with service providers encouraged to build and maintain strong relationships with local services, establish local referral pathways, and attend and participate in networking, information, and interagency groups. DCJ, together with organisations delivering community sector coordination activities, will also look at reinvigorating interagency meetings and local provider forums in locations where these have lapsed, do not exist, or are not operating as effectively as they could. Recommendation 6 focuses on updating outcomes measurement approaches in the program, in particular to reflect cultural outcomes and consider principles of Indigenous data sovereignty. The work to reflect outcomes relevant to Aboriginal people is well underway, in close collaboration with the TEI Aboriginal Community Controlled Sector. The Outcomes for Aboriginal People framework, which recognises that culture is at the heart of everything, has recently been included in the new updated program specifications, and DCJ will continue to engage with ACOs to explore opportunities to incorporate Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing as part of the outcome measurement approach. The TI program is committed to the principles of Indigenous data sovereignty and governance. Aboriginal service providers in the program currently have access to all data they collect and reported by their organisation, and can access and share that data with their stakeholders and community at any time. TI program data at a state and local government level is also currently publicly available. But we recognise we need to do more with Aboriginal service providers to support their engagement and leadership in decision-making about data with their communities. This recommendation also calls for better recording of individual clients, as well as this will facilitate better outcomes measurement. The evaluation notes that DCJ already has in place a data quality improvement strategy, and that many of the data quality issues observed through the evaluation are already in the process of being addressed. We'll continue to support the implementation of this strategy with the sector. We also recognise that we need to look for ways to better strengthen outcomes measurement for community strengthening services also. The final recommendation looks at defining the focus of future evaluations, something we will look to do together with the sector over time. Thank you, and I'll now hand you back to Jess.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Thank you to all of our presenters. That was really fantastic, and it is such a landmark evaluation for TEI. There is a large number of comments and questions in the chat. Thank you to everyone for being so engaged and proactive with those. If I could ask the presenters to respond to as many of those as you can, because we won't get through those today. Look, there were a number around the resourcing of ACOs. Anthony, I think you touched on that, and perhaps you can provide more information via email or through the chat. There was also some questions around specific results for Aboriginal children and families, particularly in relation to restoration. I wonder, Hugh, if you could also answer that in the chat. But I did want your response to, there were a few comments around the representativeness of organisations that were included in the evaluation, the representativeness of that, particularly in reference to neighbourhood community centres. And I wonder if someone could possibly speak to that, perhaps you, Lou.
Yeah, okay, thanks so much, Jess. I think kind of key is that we did make sure that we could hear from the full diversity of providers and services through the survey, and just to I guess give a sense of what that really looked like in terms of getting input. They were quite some lengthy surveys, so actually what we were able to do was to capture input across a full range of questions relating to the delivery of services, the support from the department, kind of the nature of actually the sort of contractual setups, the outcomes for clients, and I guess some of those contributing factors. We actually estimated that for most of the providers, it was probably kind of a 45-minute to an hour commitment to actually provide that feedback. And we did manage to get responses from sort of nearly all of the providers across the state. So that was kind of critical that we had that as our bedrock. And then as we looked across the different types of providers we could access to the case studies, we were talking to organisations that might both provide some of those more intensive wellbeing services to individuals, but also getting a really strong view about what things might look like across play groups and other kind of community activity groups. So we were able to get a really good and substantial sense of what this looked like across the diversity of TEI.
Great. Thank you so much. There's so many great questions here. I love this one. I'd be interested to hear if any theories of change have been refined or challenged as a result of this evaluation.
I can talk to that briefly. I think the evaluation has been really critical in kind of testing the service model and the theory of change that we have in the program. I think it's really sharpened up our understanding around how we focus on safety outcomes and some of those other kind of human services outcomes in the broader kind of domain areas really contributing to that. So I think it's given us a more focused kind of intent for the program, which we're looking to kind of deliver, through the updated program in 2026. But I don't know if Louise or Hugh or Ken have any other reflections on any of that.
Yeah, not a lot to add. I think that the theory of change, that sort of decreased service use is sort of what you want, is obviously something that's a bit tricky. So in many cases, you want increased service use because you want people who need it engaging. So that's sort of one of those sort of common things that crops up that we had to work through as part of the evaluation. But I think just the breadth of TI has been wonderful to engage with.
Thank you. And I might just move to one final question. Are there any results that can indicate how we can increase cultural informed practices across non-ACO services?
I'm very happy to add some thoughts, but I'd prefer you to start us off.
That's a very brave question. And it's a respectable one because it admits that it's an admission that, the service in terms of cultural safety has some work to do. And, cultural safety in terms of service delivery is not just a matter of, a flag on a poster or a particular calendar event. It's involves looking at your service from the board, from the governance, from the services constitution down. So in your services constitution, there should be certain objects of your organisation that stipulate issues, a commitment to, trauma-informed care practice, cultural safety, data sovereignty, the list goes on. And then it's up to the leadership of the organization, and it's a big responsibility. You can't do it on your own, and you need to seek help to try to develop various, frameworks and guidelines and training, staff training, and that's the way you build the capacity of your organization to be, truly confident and competent and capable to deliver. And you're not alone in terms of, a lot of services are still have a long way to go in terms of building their capacity to be culturally safe. So yeah, thanks for that question. It's a very brave one. Hope that was helpful.
Thanks so much, Ken. And if everyone is happy to give me 1 more minute, I'd just like to ask each of you, what's your one key takeaway message for all of our participants? And I might start with you, Ken.
I would just echo what I just said then. It's about building capacity of your organization. Even fellow organizations need to continually evolve to strengthen the capacity of their workforce, their governance, their processes. So yeah, that's my key message.
Thank you so much. Lou?
I think perhaps mine is a sort of call out to Anthony and his wonderful team to help those service providers wrestle with this balance about kind of trying to ensure they can be getting in early to support people who are starting to face vulnerabilities, and then obviously ensuring that there is enough funding to kind of respond as things are becoming increasingly complex as they are for many of the clients of these services.
Thank you, Lou. Hugh?
Well, you can probably tell I'm a data guy, but it's just really wonderful to see the rewards of all that data collection by TI providers, as well as New South Wales government investment in data, much of that over many years, and actually sort of see it be able to sort of carry through to quite a strong evaluation, I think.
Thanks, Hugh. Couldn't agree more. And Anthony, if you would like to finish us off.
Thanks, Jess. Look, I think the evaluation really reinforces what we know around the body of evidence about the effectiveness and impact of early intervention, and now having that evidence at the program level, I think is really, really important to help inform the program and support the sector around, how we can ideally do more, invest more in early intervention. And I think the report is also a really great validation of the tremendous work of the early intervention sector in supporting outcomes for families, children, and young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to our presenters. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And for all of those of you who are delivering TEI services, thank you for participating and collecting information that has gone into this evaluation. We will, as I mentioned earlier, send you a link to the recording. We will have posted links as well into the chat, and we would also like to invite you to our next Lunch and Learn on the 22nd of April at 12 noon, which is on understanding child sexual exploitation policy and practice implications. So thank you again. Have a great rest of your day and take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.